Jamal Cornelius is the CEO and executive coach for Mission Defined LLC. He's brilliant. He knows all about building teams. He's got 10 years of leadership development experience working with high-performing teams and leaders to build culture, nurture talent, and tackle their biggest challenges. He specializes in helping leaders leverage their unique strengths to thrive in times of transformation. He has designed leadership development programs for various industries, including SaaS companies, financial services, ed tech, education, government, and nonprofit teams, which I'm sure some of you may have. There's a lot of nonprofits here in St. Louis. In addition to his work as an executive coach, Jamal, leads go-to-market GTM strategy for a technology company where he bridges the divide between product and customer to bring new products to market. So let's give it up for Jamal.
Right. Thank you, Holly. One caveat on my bio, I actually recently transitioned to take the step like most of you are, and I am full-time in this entrepreneurial journey. So I was called into the coaching. Thank you. So, as Holly mentioned, I'm the executive coach and facilitator trainer for Mission Defined. And what we do is we work to support companies and individuals in those moments of transformation. So I wanted to talk to you guys today about building a championship team. This is something that I find near and dear to my heart. I've been an athlete for most of my life, had the opportunity to work on a lot of high-performing teams, both in the corporate space and in the personal space. And I think there's nothing more important than finding the right fit, the right group of individuals to walk this walk with you. So about 4 years ago, the world shut down and everything just went haywire. And while all of us were fighting for toilet paper and trying to elbow people for water at Costco, I found a couple of bright spots in my life. The first one, I have to mention, the birth of my second child. My wife would be real upset if I put that one second. But the second one was a documentary called The Last Dance. Raise your hands if you've seen The Last Dance. Excellent. So for those of you who don't know, The Last Dance is a documentary about the 1990s Chicago Bulls basketball team. They were a dynasty. They were one of the most dominant sports franchises in history. And they played with excellence, they played with grit, and they were everywhere worldwide throughout the 90s. And as a kid from Chicago, I grew up in the 90s on the South Side, there was nothing better. So each week I'd get to sit there with my daughter curled up on my chest and watch the latest revelations, and they started to unpack what this team was going through, what the challenges were, and also what it took to build that team and maintain that level of high performance. And I started to see a lot of parallels between what they were doing in the sports arena and the work that we all do building our businesses and working in the corporate space. Because a high-performing team is a high-performing team. One of the most important things you'll do as a founder, as someone who's looking to take this journey, is building the right team the first time. Getting the right people on the bus with you, getting them in the right seats to help you on this journey. There's an old African proverb: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. This means that none of us is stronger than the strength of the village with us. So as you go into the Bulls' journey, you think about this gentleman here. Who knows who that is? Everybody? Michael Jordan. So even if you are completely unfamiliar with the game of basketball, chances are you know who Michael Jordan is. And chances are you also know that he is, in almost every conversation, considered to be the greatest basketball player of all time. What you don't realize is that when Michael Jordan was starting his journey, he quickly became the best individual contributor of all time. But it took him 7 years to actually win a championship. So if you're the best on the planet, why would it take you so long to win a championship? Because life, like business, sports, it's a team game. It's not something you can walk alone no matter how great you are as an individual. And getting the right pieces around you matters. So as we go through today's workshop, we're going to cover a few things. We're going to talk about that blueprint for a championship team. We're going to walk through the archetype for these essential players. Who are those supporting cast members around those stars that you have to put in place in order to be effective? We're going to talk about the role of the leader in building this team and maintaining a high-performing team. And then we're going to ask you all to be a little introspective and think about what you're missing and what role you play on a team. So this quote is from NBA legend Phil Jackson, who was the coach of the Chicago Bulls in the 90s, won championships, 6 championships with the Bulls, won 5 more championships with the LA Lakers. And it says, good teams become great ones when the members trust each other enough to surrender the we for the me. You're going to see a lot of Phil Jackson in here. He was considered the Zen master, and he plays an important role as we think about what leadership means as we go through this journey. So a quick history lesson on the Chicago Bulls, just to give you all context. We talked about Michael Jordan being the best basketball player in the world. He was drafted number 3 in 1984. He quickly became MVP, won the slam dunk contest. He was Rookie of the Year, all of the individual accolades you could muster. That was within the first 6 years. It took 7 years for him to get a chance to win his first championship. So as we look across the journey, we can see his individual performance never faltered, but he could never reach the pinnacle. He kept running up against teams that didn't have the better individual, but they were a stronger collective. And that was his Achilles heel. So it took the right pieces of the puzzle that were put around him. So in 1987, the Bulls added Scottie Pippen, Horace Grant, later Dennis Rodman, one of the archetypes we'll talk about. Then they added Phil Jackson, the Zen master, as a head coach. And what Phil Jackson did is he instituted a game plan that required the superstar to take a little bit of a step back and let everyone else take a step forward so that they could reach greatness as a collective and not just as an individual. It takes a while to align that, or get a team to align to changing their way of performance. So you have to make sure that once everything's centered around a certain person, to change that culture to say this is centered around the we, and this is the role we play as a we, takes a little bit of time. So once he implemented those changes in 1991, they won their first championship, and there was no looking back. One of Phil Jackson's other sayings, the strength of the team is each individual member. The strength of each individual member is the team. He may have stolen this from Rudyard Kipling, from the Jungle Book, where they say the strength of the wolf is the pack and the strength of the pack is the wolf. Maybe not. It may be a Buddhist saying. He was a practicing Buddhist. So what we want to talk about now are the essential players. So we're going to talk about both the actual players who played a role in the Chicago Bulls, but also what those players would look like in an organization like yours. So there are 5 key archetypes that we're going to go through. There's the face, the backbone, the edge, the specialist, and the coach. First and foremost, we have the face. Michael Jordan. These players are highly visible, vocal, and often charismatic. They tend to be natural connectors and storytellers. They are almost synonymous with the organization. When you say Chicago Bulls, you think about Michael Jordan. When I say Apple, you think about, one more time? Steve Jobs, absolutely. They are the storied founders. These are the people who naturally play an important role as a face of an organization. So as a startup, this could be you as a founder. This could be your top performing salesperson, someone who's just comfortable leading the charge, giving the pitch, making the connection. This is the role that they play. They're often competitive and they're very, very focused on their goals. Every team needs somebody who's comfortable being out front, being the star. Some of you may be thinking about what this looks like for you, and it may be a gap that you have, and it may be a role that you're working to fill. So this may be something that you may reluctantly want to step into as the founder. And the key is going to be understanding what your strengths are, understanding your stories, so that you can communicate in a way that feels authentic to you. The second player archetype is the backbone. So Scottie Pippen was drafted in 1987. And he was kind of an unsung hero of the Chicago Bulls his whole pathway. So the backbone team members, they're the team members that are quietly confident and competent. They often do the hard technical work of making something happen. When Scottie Pippen was drafted, he worked day in and day out with Michael Jordan and the rest of the team as pieces came in and pieces came out. And in The Last Dance, one of the things that Michael Jordan says is that there would be no story about Michael Jordan without a Scottie Pippen. Michael Jordan would have all of the individual records, but none of the championships if he didn't have that person who could be the Robin to his Batman. Who is that number 2 person? These people often play important roles, but they're kind of behind the scenes. They may be your operations people, they may be project managers. They are quietly but competently delivering day in, day out, consistency and excellence. You know, if you pass something their way, you can walk off and do the next thing, and you can go have that client meeting. You need that team member that you can trust implicitly, and that demonstrates competence and excellence and delivers it the same way you would deliver every single time. One of my favorite player archetypes is the edge. This player is all go and no ego. They dig into the hard work that's usually less visible, and they do it with energy and excitement. They do it with passion. The person diving into the stands about to bust his head open is Dennis Rodman. For those of you who are unfamiliar, Dennis Rodman is a larger-than-life character, or at least that's how we know him. He dated Madonna and Carmen Electra and have all these crazy experiences, and we're going to talk about a story with Dennis Rodman in a second, too. But one of the things that you should know about him is coming out of college, he used to average 27 points per game as a college athlete. When he got to the NBA, he averaged 7 points per game. So you take someone who's used to being that front, that face, that star, that dominant, but understands that their role in this team that they're currently on is to do the hard work and to do it with grit and enjoyment. You have to have those people who are always behind the scenes and willing to just roll up their sleeves. And I worked for a tech company, and I worked with a gentleman named Andy. Andy was our director of operations. At least that's what his title was. But if you went to Andy and you needed to, your mouse was broken, Andy's the one sending you new equipment. He's issuing your computer. If you're struggling with a project or the website was struggling, he's going to troubleshoot that code with you. I called Andy one time because I had the hardest time building out this Salesforce dashboard that we needed to have up and running for an upcoming board meeting. And Andy was like, this is tricky. Let me help you figure this out. And he got excited about it, never asked for credit, never worried about anybody saying, hey, good job, you're amazing, be in the forefront. He was just willing to do the hard work behind the scenes to support every single team member and give them a chance of success. These are those people who are always there. They often are those operations folks. They could be those steady folks in, those places who are kind of a little bit of a generalist, but willing to just specialize and do some hard work. They have familiarity with something. These are the people who often will find, if you have a need, they'll go learn that new program and be that first person who becomes an expert in it because they see that that's a need that they can fill. The next archetype is the specialist. This team member has depth of expertise and effortless competency. They can be counted on to deliver in a clutch. In the 1997 NBA Finals against the Utah Jazz, Game 6, 10 seconds left on the clock, what's the play going to be? We're passing the ball in, and who are we passing it to? Michael Jordan. Bulls run the play, pass the ball into Michael Jordan, instantly double teamed. Who does he turn to take the shot in his stead? Steve Kerr, the specialist, the person who does nothing but get open, find that shot, and knock it down. And I can do it repetitively. I can do it with excellence every single time. It is muscle memory. It can be counted on. These deep specialists, they're oftentimes the people who are the unsung heroes that make things happen in your company. They could be somebody who is your product manager who just understands the customer through and through. They could be your finance person or an accounting person who's just consistently doing that work that is behind the scenes where it kind of keep the lights on. They can always be counted on to deliver consistently with excellence. And if you need them in a clutch, they can step into a different role or step into an outsized role to give you a little bit more because this is their lane and they've become an expert in it. So how do you manage all of these different characters? What does it take to be a leader in this space? So going back to the Zen master, Phil Jackson, as a leader, your job is to do everything in your power to create the perfect conditions for success by benching your ego and inspiring your team to play the game the right way. Oftentimes, as leaders, we think our job is to tell everyone what to do. But when you hire the right people, our job is to put them in the right lane and get out of the way. If there's a roadblock, we remove it. If they have a glimpse of excellence, we empower it, we encourage it. Our job is to move them closer to the forefront. Phil Jackson said you need to give up control and foster an environment that allows for individual expression. Rules reduce freedom and responsibility. That last bit almost sounds contradictory. We think about rules decreasing responsibility. But if I give you a job description that says you do task 1, task 2, and task 3, when there's a need to do task 4, what's that person going to say? It's not my job. When we have too tight of a framework, it diminishes ownership. When we hire great people, we need to let them be just that, great. Here are your guardrails. Here is the lane that you run in, and we want you to go forward and be excellent. So in the 1998 championship run, the Bulls are having a phenomenal season, and in the absence and injury of the number 2, the backbone, Dennis Rodman steps up and becomes the backbone of that team. He not only does the rebounding and the hard work, but he also starts stepping in, he's scoring, and he does this for more than half of the season. And there's a point in the show where he comes to Phil and he says, Phil, I'm done. I'm burnt out. I've got nothing left in my tank. He said, I need to release. I've been holding it together for too long. And remember, we talked about Dennis Rodman. He's kind of a crazy guy. So for him to just be straight-laced was a lot. So he comes to Phil and says, I need a release. And Phil says, okay, what do you need? He said, I need a vacation. He said, well, how long do you need? He said, can I get a week? He said, I can give you 48 hours. Phil Jackson, in the midst of a playoff run, gave Dennis Rodman 48 hours in Las Vegas to go, yes, to party his heart out. And there's documentary footage in there. They partied day and night, nonstop. And he knew that one of his stars, one of his important players, needed this release in order to come back and fill his role with the joy and excellence. And when Dennis Rodman came back, everyone was really concerned, like, he's been partying, he's probably gonna be out of shape, he's gonna struggle. He came back to the first practice and literally ran circles around everybody else. They did we can't call it what it used to be called now, but it's a run where the person in the back goes to the front. And the person in the back now has to come catch the person in the front. There's a story that it took them 4 laps to catch Dennis Rodman. He was running so fast and so hard after partying, because what he needed was that release. It wasn't going to diminish his ability if he approached something differently. And Phil Jackson knew that. He knew individually what each person needs. You have to know the individual strengths of your team, what they need to be successful, not just what everyone generally needs. No 2 people are the same, no 2 performers are the same. Even in the same role, people are going to need different things to be successful. So what are those keys to success when you're thinking about building this team? The first thing you need to do is select for talent and not tasks. Oftentimes we think about hiring and we have a job description, and these are the tasks that this person will be responsible for. This is what they need to accomplish. This is what they need to deliver. But if you're in a high growth environment, if you're a startup, you don't need somebody who can just do the task today. You need to hire someone who's talented enough to do the job that this will be tomorrow and next year and 10 years from now. Hire for the talent. How many of you guys have learned a new program in the last year? That's a task. You can teach tasks and skills. You cannot teach talent. People are innately born with the gifts that they have, and our job is to find a way to direct them and give them opportunities to keep growing and shining. The second thing, outcomes over process. How many people have ever worked for a micromanager in their career at some point? What were some of the refrains that you would hear from that micromanager?
I'm not micromanaging you, but where were you for an hour? Who cares? I got my job done.
Why did they care? What you find oftentimes with people who show up and work as micromanagers, they are often individual contributors who become leaders. And they became a leader or a manager because they were successful as an individual contributor. And they became successful by doing things a certain way. So oftentimes when they came to you, it wasn't whether or not you got the right result, it was whether or not you did it the right way, the way they asked you to, or the way they expected you to, or wanted you to. I remember I was in 4th grade and I was doing math homework and turned it in, and I remember getting my grade back, and my teacher looked there, he circled the grade and says, yes, you got the right answer, but I have no clue how you got here. Half credit. And all I thought was, does it matter if I got the right answer? I got to the destination. It doesn't matter if Google tries to take you through somebody's driveway. Eventually you make it to T-Rex, right? It's about the destination. It's about the outcome. If we manage people to a process, especially a process that's flexible, if they're in a role that allows for creativity, we're going to hold them back, and they're going to resent us, and they're going to look for a way out so they can have more flexibility. Now, some things you don't ignore, like my accountants, don't ignore your GAAP accounting principles. Like, Have some fidelity where it matters. Don't have the IRS chasing you down saying, I told you to focus on a different process. Number 3 is focus on strengths. So we talked about hiring for talent. We talk about the strengths are when you take that talent and you invest it with some time. You invest in it, you get better at it, you work on becoming a bit more effective and efficient. I want to make sure that when I'm working with somebody, they are doing things in a way and something that helps them really light up and understand, really shine. They need space to be at their best. They need encouragement in the things that they're doing well. How many people have had a performance review where the first thing you talked about was your weaknesses? How did that feel? Did you feel like you really wanted to work hard for that person? Did you feel like the weaknesses that they were pointing out are things that you could really get better at? Like, I know me, and I love data storytelling. It's important to have the data to help you understand how to craft that narrative. But I don't want to be the person who's crunching all the data. I want to partner with that person. Because what takes me 4 hours to do can take someone who's really efficient 4 minutes. It's not the best use of either of our time. We need to figure out what our people's gifts are and move them towards that as much as possible. If they're in a role that requires just immediate structure, what are those ancillary things that you can give them that can be a carrot that they can look forward to? This is not to say we ignore the things that we have to do, but that we can layer on some things that someone wants to do and aspires to. And that last thing is find the right fit. So it's thinking about hiring this person for where you're going to be and for their talents, knowing that wherever you grow and go, this person will be able to grow and shift and move with you and become a part of that team that you have future state and not just for today. So now I see a lot of old school folks in here with pen and paper, which I love because I'm usually like the old guy in the corner writing down with pen and paper. We want to talk about what you're missing. I'm going to ask you guys to be a little introspective here. So we're going to take inventory of you, the team that you're currently on, the team that you're thinking about building, and I want you to start to think about where you fall in that process. So we have our 5 archetypes here. We have the face, the backbone, the edge, the specialist, the coach. I want you to think about what role do you play? So I want you to literally take a minute and think about the role that you play on this team. Think about the current members of your team or the future members of your team. What position do you play? Where are you excellent? Where's the place where you shine? And I want you to write that down.
Can you be in more than one role, or just?
Yes. The question was, can you be in more than one role? So you do have to ask yourself, if you're more than one role, sometimes we're more than one role because of necessity, because I just have to be multiple things. But where's the thing that if I was able to focus, if I was able to build the team I want, this would be the one lane that I would swim in. Oh. She has to go back here for the face, the backbone, the edge, the specialist, the coach. The face is that public-facing person who's out there, who's moving, who's pitching, connecting. The backbone is that person who's at go-to, that number 2, quiet and confident, always delivers excellence. Backbone is an easy way to think about the backbone. Is when I think about Apple again, if I mention Apple, does anyone else come to mind? Steve Jobs. We talked about Steve Jobs. That's the face. Wozniak, what did Wozniak do?
Everything.
Ah.
Everything that was not front-facing.
So the question was, what did Steve Wozniak do with Apple? And the answer was everything that was not front-facing. Do you know who's credited with inventing the personal computer? Steve Wozniak, not Steve Jobs. We know Steve Jobs. We remember him. We think about him. But that quiet, competent person doing the hard technical work in the background was Wozniak. He's the reason why we actually have a computer. Jobs is the reason that we bought it. You needed both of those things to be true for this to permeate. So after you think about what role you play on your team, I want you to think about what's missing. What are those gaps you have on your team? When we think about building a well-rounded team, that means we need a team of experts with different expertise, with different experiences. And a well-rounded team is not a team of people who are all generally average at everything. You won't accomplish much that way. But if everybody stands out in a unique space, collectively you will be well-rounded with a group of excellent people. Does your team have diversity of thought, diversity of skills, or do we all come from the same background and that we go through the same experiences, go through the same boot camps? So are we all trained to think and act and believe one way? Because brainstorm is going to be boring if we don't have that diversity of thought and experience. And as you think about what your gaps are, start thinking about some of the ways that you can spot talent. That's always a question. Well, how do I find what I need, or what glimpses of excellence people actually have? And that's really what you look for. Where does that team member demonstrate grit? Where are they doing a task where they're doing it with excellence, and when it gets hard, they dig in a little bit further. They have more energy. When they're delivering something, what gets them excited? People do a lot of work, but you'll see moments where people have a chance to really do something interesting. And when they talk about that part of it, that's where you know that they're really in a space that they enjoy. That's something that you can build on. So getting into the tactical part of this, as we think about how we're hiring a team, a lot of us are in the space where we're actually building this team, we're not quite on the team, or we're just figuring out how we can fill out the rest of our team. Hiring for talent is going to be the most important thing that you do. Products will launch and fail, but a good team can launch and succeed a product even after failure after failure. It's about the people. The people are the most important part of you and your growth and everything that you're going to put forward. So the first thing that I recommend is looking for an arc of experiences. If you are in an innovative space and you hire somebody who's only worked in one company in one position for 15 years and hasn't had much varied experience in that, what's going to happen when things have to change, when you have to be nimble? Does that person express a desire to be able to do that? Or is that person someone who has a history of seeking new experiences, new challenges after being successful in them? Don't get me wrong. If you look at someone's resume and they move every 3 to 6 months, it's kind of a red flag. You might want to run from that one. But if somebody has successfully launched companies and products and been on different teams and performed with excellence and moved forward, whether it's a zigzag or not, that's something to pay attention to. That might be somebody who can fit in a nimble environment that you're trying to build. Number 2, when you're in the hiring process, stories do not lie. How many of us have been on a team where someone gets brought on board and in the interview they performed well and they show up in that position and they barely know anything? Everything that they said they knew was just of course I know data analytics. Yeah, I know Tableau. Of course I can do this. Yes, I've done marketing. When you're interviewing tactically, ask them the stories. So are you good at data analytics? If so, tell me about a time where you had to analyze data, put together a story from that data using X, Y, and Z tool, and give it to someone to present to a leadership person. And what was the result? What was your role on that team specifically? Not just am I tangentially familiar with this. When they tell you those stories, that's going to give you a real insight into what their role is, their level of expertise in that. It's hard to tell a story from end to end where you're talking about ideation all the way through result and fake it the whole way through. Somewhere in there, you're going to have to, take someone else's experiences, and no one's really that good. So it gives you some ideas. But as they're telling those stories, listen for the moments of flow. So flow is a concept in positive psychology called the psychology of optimal experience. It's thinking about how we can perform at our best consistently, day in and day out, and that will bring us joy. When you look for moments of flow, these are moments where people get lost in time, where you're working on something and you look up and it's been 3 hours instead of 30 minutes. And you're like, how did this happen? When you see those moments, when you hear those moments in someone's interview, when they light up and their eyes get really excited about the one part of the project they were talking about, that might be an area where they really could focus. That might be a glimpse into their talent and strength and something you want to pour into. That's a growth area for them. So it's not just, tell me a story how you can fill this role today. That's a way to glimpse what that growth area could be for tomorrow. Define growth based on internal needs. This sounds contradictory to the one before, but it's really important to be honest and open about where your organization is, where they can go within your organization as you're bringing people on board. Oftentimes we'll bring in high-performing people with a bait and switch and say, hey, if you do this role really well, you can have, in 12 months, we will have an opportunity for you to be promoted. But if that's not a reality, if that's contingent on other things, we need to be really clear and honest about that. Because when that doesn't happen, those people can become resentful. So going back to the backbone, Scottie Pippen, in the final year of the Chicago Bulls, he got a surgery where he had to sit out for the first couple of months of the season. It was an elective surgery that he could have done a couple months earlier. He deliberately waited to the start of the season because he was like, I don't feel like going above and beyond for this team anymore. How could somebody who was that integral to the team decide they don't want to go above and beyond? At that time in that season, Scottie Pippen was top 5 in every statistical basketball category in the entire league. He was 122nd in compensation because he signed a long-term contract. But instead of doing the honorable thing to say, hey, we signed this, there was less revenue in the league, there were different opportunities, now there's more. Even though you have this contract, we believe in you, we trust you, we want to keep you. Here's a spot bonus to make up some of that difference, that little show of faith. That would have made all the difference in the world to show somebody who's a top contributor that you appreciate them, instead of just saying, hey, a deal's a deal, you just gotta suck it up. Because once they become resentful, even if they perform for you, they're one foot out the door and the other foot on the banana peel. Not a good place to be. That's my favorite saying, sorry. So it's important to think about it. Gary Vee always talks about, he likes to promote fast and fire faster. Not saying go firing everybody, but it's really important to think about if you're not within a rigid structure, if you're building a team that can be the way you need it to be, if you're building a company that doesn't have to have a rigid structure where you have to wait 12 months, 18 months, 2.5 years to be considered for a promotion, don't. Find ways to recognize excellence, find ways to give additional support, tasks, anything, any stretch exercises, even if you don't have the money, say, hey, we know that you're really interested in this, you're really good at maybe talking to customers. Do you want to lead this webinar? Do you want to lead this rollout? I've worked with a product manager who was one of the people who was always behind the scenes, but had the gift of gab. And one of the things we'd always have Tyler do, it's great for you to get these user stories behind the scenes, but join this customer call. Come tell them your story. And when they give a pain point that they're trying to solve, that salesperson is kind of fumbling for the answer. He's like, oh, here's how this product can solve that for you. And here's what happens. And here's what this customer did to do that. Connecting those dots accelerates everything, giving him an opportunity to use that other gift that he had and not just be in the role that we hired him for. The last thing is you want to coach for growth based on the person's individual capability. So even if you're honest about what the restrictions are in your organization today, say you can only grow so far here, but I see this in you. I want to grow you for the role you're going to be in tomorrow, 10 years from now. If you have a marketing specialist who wants to be a CMO and they're showing some of those things, those glimpses to be better in these other spaces, coach them in those spaces. Let them work on things that will advance their skill set. If you're a good leader, your team members will outgrow you. But former team members and former employees become phenomenal allies and referrals once they outgrow you and move beyond, because they remember you fondly, they remember you poured into them as well. That's why a lot of great companies have boomerang employees. You'll see them go out, go do something else, come back at a higher level, because there just wasn't a clear upward trajectory, but they were qualified to do more. They were coached up, moved around, and came back at a higher level once something was open and available. Coach them for what their potential is, not the limits of their current position. So I'll close with the last quote, and I want to answer some questions. But this is from a different phenomenal but fictional team. This is from Nick Fury with the Avengers. And he said the idea was to bring together a group of remarkable people and see if they could become something more. As we're forming our teams, we want to think about how do we get the most impressive people we can find, and as a collective, we're greater than the sum of our parts. So thank you guys for your time and attention. Hope this was very helpful. I would love to open it up for any questions that you have.
Does anybody have any questions?
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 Thank you for sharing. I think it was an excellent outline. One of the things that I kept thinking about, as I think maybe a lot of people in this room, is good people take, it takes capital to bring on talent. And so, for a startup or for a smaller business that maybe doesn't have that capital, in your experience, what are the roles? You put up archetypes there. What are the archetypes that people tend to prematurely hire versus the roles that maybe people hire too late?
That's a really great question. What are some of the roles that people prematurely hire? I think it's important to not hire somebody who has really deep expertise if you're not ready to receive it. I think conversely, it's really important to not hire an intern to do an expert's job. I think we sometimes mix those things up and we really don't have an understanding of what we need. It's better to have a fractional expert and to have them 40% of their time delivering the exact thing that you need based on their expertise because you have limited capital than it is to hire a full-time novice and spend more time training them than actually producing. On the flip side of it, there's an opportunity as a startup and as an early stage company to build really effective partnerships with a lot of the resources around you. St. Louis has a phenomenal group of universities, all of whom have really brilliant students who are really interested in getting out and getting experiences. One of the teams I built when I was still living in Chicago, we had to basically build a full Salesforce system from the ground up, where we were actually building out an application for this program, and we were able to analyze it and track all of the applicants and really go through and also manage the fundraising. It took a lot for us to build this, and we were a 4-person team. We didn't have the people to do it, but the University of Chicago did. And the University of Chicago also had a program where they would pay that person a stipend to come bring their expertise to me as long as we gave them the experience. So we worked with them. They were able to hit the ground running. We built systems that are still in place to this day. And every single one of those interns is now a director of operations or CRM and analytics somewhere else. They had that early experience. They had the expertise. They just needed that shot. And we needed somebody who could give us the talent without us having full access to the capital yet. So you have to be a little bit creative in how you think about filling some of these roles and plugging those gaps. But there's a lot of opportunity here. But if you're really clear around how you structure those things, it makes it a lot easier. Some people will go into an internship and just say, hey, this is just free experience. We want you to just keep working at this for free forever and try to milk you until there's nothing left. It's not a positive experience. It's not going to be good for you. It's not going to be good for them. So you have to be strategic about those partnerships. So I think the idea is really figuring out what exactly you need and how much of it you need. Because what you can get from 2 hours out of an expert is worth 20 hours of somebody who's just learning a system. So maybe you just find the right people to contract with for those 2 hours to say, this is what we need from a brand strategy perspective, and that's what I can contract with. I can get 10 hours a month from you at your existing rate. But I value your expertise, and I know you'll deliver in half the time because you have that much experience. Yeah, great question.
I noticed that one thing that was common amongst the team is that everybody was like bought in, invested into the team. Like, what do you do when you have employees that aren't vested and they're just like box checkers and there's a lack of initiative?
Have you asked them where they want to be? I think it's important to define the environment that you've put in place. If your environment is going to be high growth, high performance, that's the standard that you set. There are a lot of people who want to go to work, do their work, check, punch the clock, and go home. And those people keep the world running. Everybody can't go chase a dream and be an entrepreneur. But those people also need to be in a place where it's okay to be that person. And you need to make sure that your culture is clear that this is how we show up for each other. This is how I'm showing up for you, and this is the commitment I expect from everyone else. Because I'm not just showing up for the business that I own so I have more stake in it. I'm showing up for you to make sure that we're building something together as a collective. So it's really about realigning and having, I recommend really doing just a full-on values exercise and just understanding, is there a disconnect? Do you guys value different things? Do you need different things? And then you get into the coaching part of it, whether or not that person from a performance perspective is just dealing with other things and they're just giving you what they have left in the tank. A lot of it is at the individual level to suss out what the challenge is. And if the challenge is just not a good fit because that person needs to be in a place that's just a little bit slower and a little bit more predictive, then there's nothing wrong with coaching a person into their next opportunity. I think oftentimes you see a lot of companies who just like fire people or have a layoff. If you're in a real performance management environment, there should never be a moment or mystery whether a person is performing or not. They shouldn't just mysteriously get fired one day based on performance. They should know day in and day out, like, hey, here's where we're struggling, here's what we are expecting, here's what we mutually agreed to, and here's where we're falling short. And here's where you seem to be excelling. And I think this role over here, this glimpse of greatness I see, you might be better suited for that kind of role permanently. So how do we make sure that you're in this space and successful until you transition to the next thing? And I will help you transition to the next thing. Because everyone should leave your organization as an ally and not an enemy. We want them to have a good experience, whether it's being coached up in the organization or coached out of the organization. They should still be about finding them their best fit. And sometimes it's not with you. And sometimes it's only with you for a season.
So how do you know when you're ready to hire your first full-time person? I have a ton of contractors that I work with on a consistent basis at my business, and I'm at a place where I don't know if it makes sense to hire a full-time person yet, and also if I did, what role should they fill? So just curious on your thoughts about that.
Well, the second part of the what role should they fill is answering your first question to say, what is my greatest need? Where am I struggling, and what's going to be my greatest complement? So as you think about where you're excellent, what you do best, who is somebody who fills the gaps that you have? That's the first hire. If I'm somebody who's always good outward facing and I'm pitching, I need an ops person behind the scenes. I need to be organized. I need a project manager. I need someone who loves that because it drives me insane. And the more they love that and do that effectively, the more I can be out getting new business. So you figure out what the balance is, what the thing is that you're missing. And if you have a world of contractors you're working with, which of them is already doing that well? And maybe you just think about how you gradually increase that one person who plugs your biggest gap, the one that gives you the most challenge, the one that takes the most hours away from you doing the other things that add value to the business. Yeah, great question.
Anybody? Anybody else?
You talked a little bit about COVID, and one of the things that I saw, and I don't know if everyone else saw this, but as the bottom lines for business got a little bit tighter, I think it was in cost of living got higher. I think it was interesting to see how businesses adjusted to that. And one of the things that I saw were just small perks like DoorDash passes or TV subscriptions, you know, these what seemed like small and minimal perks compared to like a 5% raise. I was wondering if you can speak to that a little bit, and I'm sure there's psychology behind it on how those small external perks really work toward maybe an internal culture, or if they don't.
So that's a great question. If you think about what sort of perks and incentive help to drive a culture, I would say that your perks and incentive have to meet the moment. So giving someone a DoorDash gift card when it's not safe for them to breathe the air outside and everyone's getting their food delivered, highly convenient. It's perfect for that time to say, hey, we know we had to send you home. We know it's crazy, but we care about you. We see you. Here's a little bit off your plate. You don't have to cook dinner tonight. Same thing if that person just went out on maternity leave. We value you. Here's a basket. Here's something to say. Here's your first couple of meals for the first week, because we know moving around is going to be crazy. Keeping track of the kids is going to be crazy. Whatever that thing is, it should meet the moment and it should be personal. It should exist. A pizza party is not culture. A free beer on Friday is not culture. Contrary to popular belief and large company ethos, snacks are not culture. Your culture will not get you there, and culture eats strategy for breakfast. So you have to build culture intentionally, and culture is really about how do I care about the individuals inside of our collective and see them as unique entities and understand what you need versus what someone else needs. As a startup, as somebody who's in an early stage, there may be an opportunity for you to have a full flex benefits package to say, hey, you know, based on wherever season you're in, one person may need 2 extra days of PTO instead of a raise. So maybe you give them that, you flex those benefits for whatever their need is, because this person has a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old who are just running around crazy. Not talking from personal experience, but totally am. Like, time is more valuable in that instance than even money, even as much as daycare is. So figure out what those things are that would matter to the individuals in your team, and you can start to build a suite that makes sense. But yeah, I've been in so many places where it's like, here's a free food on a Friday, don't you love us? And it's always right before they do the employee engagement survey.
I was wondering if you could expand a little bit more about attaining talent, specifically when you just have one open role and hundreds of qualified people apply, and it gets to a point where the margin for cutting people just feels so razor thin, you know what I mean? And it's like, what do you tell people to look for? What you know, it's one thing to get person to tell a story when they're in an interview, but you know, the paper can only say so much. So what do you recommend to look for besides okay, they only do a one job for 3 months and they move to the next thing? What else can we look for?
Yeah, I think you're going to have your natural filters as you figure out how to whittle down these large applicant pools, especially when they're more entry-level roles. You're going to have more applicants. It's just the nature of the beast. The more closer you get to expertise and depth of experience, the fewer applicants you're going to have. So it's less of a problem there. But it's really about those early filters, understanding the personality, the criteria, the things that you need. Honestly, that's when it's really important to do things like an airport test. When you're a tiny crew, you need to be able to sit with that person for 6 hours at a time and still enjoy each other, still work hard next to each other and not hate each other or resent each other for it. Those little personal dynamics matter so much more in a small shop. I'm also a big fan of those job simulation activities where you have a chance to say, here's what you might do in this role. Can you show us an example? But I'm not a fan of those if they're really long and they're unpaid. So I think if you get down to that point where you have your top 2 or 3 candidates, it's okay to say, hey, we would like you to do this. We're going to offer you a stipend of $200. This is all we have. But it's something to say that we value your time as you do this work for us so that we can assess where you are. Those little nuggets, that's that same give and take to say, here's something to show that we appreciate your time and we value you as a candidate, whether or not we end up working together in the end. But it's really figuring out what some of those natural filters are going to be tricky, but it's important. Sometimes that's where people in those early stages, when you have one role and it's really specific, referrals go a long way. Referrals from your team, people who have vouched for them, work with them in different ways and places, that can whittle some of it down. And from that referral pool and then your top applicant pool, just on the paper side, you can try to whittle in a little bit there. Yeah, absolutely.
You spoke earlier about not having like too many rules and too tight of a framework and not to be a micromanager. And I was giggling because I was the micromanager. And the reason being is because in my company, it grew really fast.
Mm-hmm.
So I had like 100 employees over a period of time, but I was losing people mainly because of the industry I'm in. It's kind of common, but I was like terrified because my face was the brand, and anything they did, it would reflect on me. And so my question is, how do you have that flexibility and these guardrails you spoke of, but still have the guardrails in place? Because I think it could be like a really thin line, especially in certain industries, creative industries, where you don't have like the corporate structure.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it sounds like you might have been missing your number 2. You might have been missing that Robin to your Batman. So you were both the face and working. It's hard to work in the business and be the face of it and also on the business to continue to grow. It's hard to sit in both of those seats because one has to have a strategic view and one is thinking about the operations. The other person is actively pitching and working on client engagements. Those 2 things are really difficult to juggle, and every founder has to figure out what that transition point is and what the right mix is that's still going to give you joy. Because if you enjoy the work of the client work, maybe it needs to be that 80-20. Maybe you do 20% client work and then 80% business development and public facing and all of the paperwork and administrative stuff. But you have to find that balance. But it sounds like oftentimes for micromanagers, the challenge is it's not just they want to micromanage, it's that there's an absence of trust. They don't feel like they have somebody that they can comfortably delegate to that will deliver with excellence. Excellence doesn't necessarily mean like they would follow the exact process that I laid forth, because they have to find their own way within our parameters, because this is how we do a project or this is how we deliver an engagement for a client. But you have to be able to trust somebody to take those reins in your absence. And if not, you end up micromanaging because you have to check in every step of the way. And sometimes it's just whittling down that team to say, hey, some people just aren't hitting our deadlines. They're not delivering what we need to do at the quality level that we expect. And from this smaller team, we can figure out how to build back out more intentionally. Because some people just are not a good fit or just cannot. Some people are just really bad at meeting deadlines. Some people are really bad working with clients. And maybe they're just in the wrong role. Maybe they need to be realigned so they're not client facing, whatever the challenge is. But it's either finding the right fit for them and also finding the right support for you. So similar to Holly, it's figure out what that balance is. What are your biggest gaps that you could actually find somebody to fill so that they could be your number 2? Those partnerships are where we find the most value. I know me, I am also a Gallup certified strengths coach. So I'm an influencing leader. So that means I do a lot of things like this and pitching and speaking and working directly with clients. I love the creative part of it. I am not the most organized person. And I know that I need somebody who's organized and strategic to partner with, so that between me coming up with ideas and then putting some structure and some guardrails around it, we can get something out quickly. But I look for those partnerships because I know where I'm really good and I know where I have some areas that just not my natural strength.
I'm with an organization that's about 25 people. We're scattered all over the country. And things that could be questions that you could just step over to somebody's desk for a quick question are no longer, like, yeah, you can do Teams messages or text somebody, but, So I guess I'm curious on any strategies that you can share about building that sense of team, cohesion, right? And I'm trying to think of the right term, but it's something along the lines of, you're not going to let the other person down, that sense of ownership, right? So I guess I'm kind of curious on ways that you can recommend to navigate, build such a team structure.
Great question. So I think in part of that is you understanding, having each team member understand what you trust them to deliver and how you trust them to deliver explicitly. Like, hey, you deliver this with excellence and you've been doing it consistently. We don't need to check in at this point. We just need to check in on the final product. I rubber stamp it and you go. So you figure out what that looks like for each of the people that you manage and what that looks like for your managers managing their team members as well. Also sounds like you guys just need some human touch points where you can have almost, there's a reason why in like the agile methodology you have stand-ups, and those stand-ups are you come together, we just talk about what's working, what isn't, what's a problem, something that's a quick hit. In any type of team, if you have 15 minutes in the morning, every morning we got to hop on as a team at 10 a.m. Central, which is just enough time for everybody in every time zone to connect. And it's 15 minutes, hey, what were your problems from yesterday that's like an open door we needed a quick chat about? It can be broken up by team or it can be broken up, do it as a collective. You're not that big, but if you have smaller specialties in there, it might be helpful to just say, hey, here's what I was struggling with yesterday. I wanted to tap you, but I knew you were in meetings the other day. But we keep this time sacred so that we can quickly ask questions and check in, because it greatly expedites the process to have a real human conversation versus just like 47 Slack messages. So one of those check-ins is always really helpful. Part of the culture building side of it, I like to do simple things with my teams like coffee and conversations. So at least once or twice a month, we'll just meet up on a Friday, virtually even, and just talk about life, talk about things that are new. We could also talk about what's inspiring us in our marketplace, what's something that's interesting. As a marketing team, I would have our team come together and say, hey, what's something you saw? What's an email you got from something in your inbox? What's a campaign that you're working on? What's a new software that was like, hey, this is really cool, this could help us be more efficient? But what's piquing your interest? What's inspiring you? So little moments where people could just come and not just think about the projects they're working on, but come together and just connect, brainstorm, be human, have those kind of pleasantries as well. That's kind of a helpful point of it.
May I add a follow-up?
Yes.
So it's not like people are not delivering, right, or that, being disrespectful to others. It's just, there's a sense of team that you build by sort of like being shoulder to shoulder or something, right?
Yeah.
We were actually just talking about that this morning, and I tell you, it's so easy, and like if you you schedule like an hour Zoom meeting for like just sort of team building, it's so easy to get distracted and start multitasking, right? So I actually chimed in, it's like, just to get together for the sake of getting together, I get it, we want to do this, but I'm just going to tell you, we get distracted because I can tell other people's eyes, what they're looking at another screen and so on. It's so easy to do it, right? So I think what you're suggesting of like, maybe it's just rather than a full hour, it's like a 15-minute thing, right?
Yeah.
That's scheduled every maybe 4 or 6 weeks, something of that nature.
It doesn't have to be that long.
It doesn't have to be long, right? But that's that. Or the other suggestion I made was, all right, but give me some content that's valuable. Maybe it's a training or something of that nature. Otherwise, it's like you just feel like I could be doing business development at this time. I could be doing this other thing at that time.
So
Thank you. So,
if you think about, as a strengths coach, one of the things that you think about is people who have like high analytical strengths, oftentimes will come into a meeting and they're like, all right, let's get to work. Let's do it. And then you have people who are very high relationship building or influencing like me, and you'll take 15 minutes to actually talk about what you came to meet about, because you're talking about your day and your life and your kids and the things that you did. And that human connection for most people is important, but what that human connection looks like for your team is also important. And where you structure it is important. So if your team is all a get to business kind of team, then let's have a 45-minute meeting and we'll save the last 15 minutes. We'll challenge ourselves to be efficient enough to do everything we need, and at the last 15 minutes, like, hey, quick check-in, how's everybody doing? Do you need anything? How's everything? What's new in your life? Whatever it may be. But so find out what that looks like for you, because sometimes having that do nothing moment, especially when you're just super busy, it feels like everybody is like not being productive and you have a team full of drivers, which is good. So figure out what flow works for them and also what method of connection works best for them. It's going to be unique for every team and every set of personalities. Sometimes it's just written, sometimes it's just coming together and chat. So people like me, we can just sit in a room and talk all day, but some people just like need simple connections or simple just pointing out, hey, this was a big win, you fixed this bug for us, that was phenomenal, client super happy, public shout out, thank you for doing that. And you could just shoot that over email or even just like a team like wins channel in Slack.
I just wanted to add something quickly to your point. My former job, what they did we did a little bit of that with like the quick meetings and whatnot. We also had a separate group chat for things you find interesting, the software stuff you brought up, the like what's inspiring you. That way it's not necessarily confined to a meeting time, but as someone's finding something they like interesting, they find to be valuable to the team or the company, it can be shared without it being, that can be maybe a compromise between the shoulder to shoulder, but there's also no way to talk about casual things. I think I understand what kind of environment you're trying to get at. I think maybe even having a dedicated group chat outside of like a team's like professional setting can be a good bridge for that.
Yeah, those sort of things help for asynchronous connection, especially across time zones. We would have a channel where it's just like, hey, share your favorite recipes. And that's just the recipe channel where people can just go in and talk about, here are the cookies I'm making for Christmas. You know, whatever it may be, you just have those whatever moments to connect with the team in the way that makes sense for them. Yeah.
Okay, I think we're coming up on time. Let's everybody give Jamel a round of applause.
Thank you, guys.